Well, hello everyone. My name is Caitlin Singer, and I am here with Keith Schubert, and we are District Data Protection Officer coaches with NARIC's Data Security and Privacy team. Before we do get started with the presentation, we just want to let you know that we will be holding a Q&A at the end of the presentation if anyone has any questions. So if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, just add them to the chat and we will make sure to answer those during the Q&A portion. So now we will be getting into our presentation of To Protect Privacy Now, Know What, Why, and How. So as educators, we want you to have an awareness of data protection. And we hope that by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to understand what data needs to be protected, why we need to protect that data, and how we go about protecting it.
So first, let's talk about what data we're going to be protecting, right? What do we need to protect? Well, first of all, let me tell you about slides that have way too much information on them, right? We all dislike those slides, right? Well, this is one of them, and I'm sorry, but I really did want to put this out there and show it to you anyway and break all those wonderful PowerPoint rules because this is so important. Under Ed Law 2D, we have two types of protected data. We have student PII, or personally identifiable information, and we have teacher and principal APPR data. So let's talk for a minute about student personally identifiable information. Ed Law 2D defines that by using the FERPA definition, and it includes, but it's not limited to, the student's name, the name of the student's parent or other family members, the address of the student or student's family, a personal identifier, such as the student's social security number, a student ID number or a biometric record, other indirect identifiers, such as the student's date of birth or the place of birth or even the mother's maiden name. And then other information that alone or in combination is linked or can be linkable to a specific student that would allow a reasonable person in the school community who does not have personal knowledge of the relevant circumstances to identify the student with reasonable certainty. And then finally, information requested by a person who the educational agency or institution reasonably believes knows the identity of the student to whom the education record relates. All of that is just a great big mouthful of information, I know. But what I want to emphasize is the big picture here of PII, student PII, or personally identifiable information, and this FERPA definition that Ed Law 2D uses. Also protected under Ed Law 2D is teacher APPR data. And, specifically, it's teacher or principal data, meaning that personally identifiable information from the records of an educational agency relating to APPR, or annual professional performance reviews of classroom teachers or principals, that is confidential and not subject to public release under applicable laws.
So now let's take a look at why we need to protect our data. So we have defined what protected data is. So let's take a look at why someone would want another person's data. So two main reasons you'll see are identity theft, which is the most significant, and targeted advertising, which all of us know too well. Identity theft occurs when someone uses another person's personal identifying information, like their name, social security number, or credit card number, without their permission. And they do so to commit fraud or other crimes. In 2020, the Federal Trade Commission received 4.8 million identity theft and fraud reports, and that's up 45% from 3.3 million in 2019. Targeted advertising, you'll see, is the next. That's another reason why someone would want our data, because targeted advertising is a way of just basically placing ads or promotional messages based on demographics or on the consumer's previous buying history or behavior. So a great example of this, and I always think about this example, is when maybe you're searching for new furniture for your living room on Google. And then a couple hours later, you go on Facebook or some other social media and you see ads relating to furniture. This is a great example of targeted advertising. It happens all the time to all of us daily. And in the next couple of slides, we'll take a closer look at identity theft and targeted advertising and how it pertains to student data. So we hear the words identity theft and we might read about it in articles or see a segment about it on the news and naturally think it only happens to adults. For a long time, I did. But the truth is it actually happens far too often to children. It's estimated that over 1.3 million children's identities are stolen annually. And you may ask yourself why? Why would identity thieves target children? Well, one reason being that children have a clean slate. And another reason being that children don't have reasons to check their credit report, right? Why would they need to? So bad credit can go undetected for many years. And we put in a quote here from Emily Wilson, who wrote The Worry Trend of Children's Data Being Sold on the Dark Web. And she said, criminal marketplaces hidden away on the dark web have entire economies devoted to buying, selling, and leaking stolen information. It's basically a full-time job for cyber criminals, and they've built e-commerce platforms to keep up with it. So we'll take a look now at what happens when student data is stolen. So the dark web is a part of the internet. I'm sure we've all heard of it. It's a part of the internet that isn't indexed by search engines. You've no doubt heard talk of the dark web as a hotbed of criminal activity, and it is. In general, you can buy credit card numbers, drugs, counterfeit money, stolen subscription credentials, hacked Netflix accounts. I couldn't believe it when I saw it, and software that helps you break into other people's computers. So all of that you can get on the dark web. But as for children's information, a child's social security number goes for $4. A child's data package, which includes date of birth, social security numbers, child's first and last name, that goes for $25 on the dark web. And a student's diploma goes for $100. So all of that you can get on the dark web, which is very surprising.
So with identity theft, okay, Kate talked about that, but I want to kind of transition us over now to talk about targeted advertising. Let's talk for a second about free software. There's a lot of free software out there, and we all use free software, right? I know I use free software at home. But how do you think that the makers of free software applications make their money? I know it's possible, right, that they give you some of their product for free in hopes that you'll love it so much that you'll purchase their premium product, right? Or in many cases, what they do is they collect your data and then they sell that data to third parties who target advertisements to you and to your students. Part of EdLaw 2D's purpose is to protect students from the use of their PII, their personally identifiable information, for commercial purposes such as this. Advertisers are literally building a profile on each of your students so that they can market their products to them. I know free software is often a very sensitive subject in school districts, the elephant in the room, if you will. But we're going to talk more about this in the presentation. We're actually going to circle back around to this at the end and discuss this quite a bit. So I just want you to kind of stand by on that, and we'll save that for a little bit later on. But I wanted to give you a taste of that right now to start to think about that. Also, think for a second about this chart and think about why corporations might want your district's student data. In 2016, businesses spent $0.6 billion. That's billion with a B, right? $1 billion in digital advertisements that specifically targeted children. And that number, as you can see, has climbed from 2016 every single year. That number has climbed. And in 2021, it's forecasted to hit $1.7 billion.
So we've defined what data needs to be protected and why protecting it is so imperative. And now we're going to take a look at how we can protect that data. So of course, enter New York State Education Law 2D. So first we'll talk a little bit about Education Law 2D and Regulation 121 and how this is New York State's way of helping to protect student data. So the big emphasis on this slide that you see here is protecting student data. That's why we kind of bulleted each kind of thought and section and put protects student data because we really want to emphasize that. So as educators, you may have heard New York State Education Law 2D, and you may have a very basic understanding of what it is, or maybe some aspects of it, but we want to make sure you know how it aims to protect data, specifically student data. So you'll see the first bullet here. It protects student data from being used for commercial purposes or marketing purposes and things like targeted advertising, like we just discussed earlier. It also aims to protect student data by ensuring those who have access to student data are properly trained on how to handle it. And not only are you as educators trained annually on how to protect student data, but software vendors have to ensure their staff are properly trained in handling student data if it's applicable. It also aims at protecting student data by including a district's Bill of Rights to vendors, as well as reviewing their data privacy and security policy to align with your district. And it also protects student data by providing a cybersecurity framework for districts to use in order to establish data integrity. So we'll discuss these bullet points in more detail along with the additional elements of EdLaw 2D in the coming slides.
All right, so this brings us to kind of an overview of EdLaw 2D, or EdLaw 2D in a nutshell, if you will. And of course, we talk about Part 121 of the Commissioner's Regulation, which is tied to EdLaw 2D. And essentially, there are 9 main categories or 9 elements of the law. And so let's touch briefly on what those are, just to kind of give you an overview of all of it. So first, appoint a data protection officer.
So the Data Protection Officer, or the DPO, leads the implementation of data protection policies and procedures in your district.
Adopt and post a data security and privacy policy.
So the Board of Education adopts a policy, and that policy is posted on your district's website and implemented by your district's DPO.
Protect personally identifiable information.
To protect student PII and teacher principal APPR data.
Parents' Bill of Rights for data privacy.
Your district will adopt and post a Parent's Bill of Rights on your district's website.
Training.
Provide annual training to all employees who handle PII.
Third-party contracts.
Ensuring software vendors comply with EdLaw 2D privacy requirements.
Incident reporting and notification.
Promptly follow reporting and notification procedures when any breach or unauthorized release occurs.
Unauthorized disclosure complaint procedure.
Construct and communicate procedures to file complaints of unauthorized release of protected data.
The NIST Cybersecurity Framework.
So lastly, your district will work to align its data privacy policies and procedure with the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF.
All right. So that's a lot, right? That's a lot of stuff, a lot of nuts to be dealing with. And your district DPO or data protection officer is going to be very busy trying to manage and navigate all of that. But I know now everybody here on the call today is not a DPO, and all of these things do not fall on your lap. But there are some things that we want to specifically zero in on that apply to all of you, right? That apply to all of us working within the school district. So we specifically want to talk about third-party contracts, protecting PII, and training.
So this is a pretty important slide, third-party contracts. So first off, software that doesn't receive any student PII or APPR data does not need a third-party agreement. It doesn't. And sometimes software only receives PII from a username. So a district may choose, if you want, to assign aliases to students so that the software doesn't even get the student's name. So that's a good tip. However, for any and all software that does receive student PII or teacher APPR data, the district must get the software vendor to sign the parent's Bill of Rights and provide some other contractual information. So what we're referring to is a third-party contract, or sometimes we refer to it as a data privacy agreement. So this means, as an educator, the first and most important place to start when protecting student data is using district-approved software. That's the big piece. So this is where you can communicate with your district's DPO. So you want to communicate to see what software products are already approved by your district. Your DPO is continually working with software vendors to obtain signed data privacy agreements that include your district's Bill of Rights. And the data privacy agreements ensure that the vendor is basically playing by the rules when it comes to protecting your students' data. And at some point, if your DPO hasn't already, they may take steps to do what we call blacklisting software. And that's where they send a list of products out to you, advising you not to use them any longer because they haven't contractually complied with protecting student data. It's not to say we don't want you to use this, but they're looking out for student data. They may even go as far as to block internet access to those products as well. And in these cases, your DPO or your curriculum coordinator may ask you to use an alternate software, one that's more one that's district approved and similar to one you have in mind, but it's also EdLaw 2D compliant. Because the software vendor signed the data privacy agreement with the district. So it's always best to communicate with your DPO. Every district will need to work out the specifics of their process. So every district's process is different. So again, it's imperative to work with your district's DPO when requesting software.
All right, great. Third-party contracts are really, I know that's tough. And Kate, thank you so much. That's a great, analysis and breakdown of how to deal with that. And and the intricacies of that. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions about that. And if anybody has any questions, please post those in the chat, and we'll talk about that some more after we finish the presentation. But now let's talk a little bit about the other two nuts of those three that I said probably applies to everybody on the presentation today. Protecting PII and training. Well, hopefully this is some training for everybody, right? But I want to talk specifically or give you some training specifically in protecting PII. So know the numbers, right? This slide, how breaches happen. Wow, you know, there's a lot of numbers on here, a lot of overwhelming numbers. And, you know, one of the first things that you can do to protect your students' PII is to be on the lookout for data breaches and how data breaches happen. And just looking at some of these numbers, I see, first of all, 27% of data breaches were discovered by third parties. 32.3 of the breaches used people as a means to compromise data. 37.6% of the breaches used desktop computers, as the conduit to compromising data. 43% were social attacks, right? Somebody used a social tool like email, for example, to get through. I hope you're writing all these numbers down. There's going to be a quiz on these percentages at the end, right? 51% included malware. 62% of breaches featured hacking. 66% of malware was installed via malicious email attachments. Oh, we're going to talk about that in a couple slides from now. And 81% of hacking-related breaches leveraged either stolen and or weak passwords. Oh, Kate's going to talk to you about this one too. But on this particular slide, you see all those numbers that I just read to you? Put those aside for a second. I really just want you to focus on one number on this slide, and that is 91% of cyber attacks started with a phishing email. 91%, right? They started with a phishing email. Well, what's a phishing email? That might help if I explain that, right? Let's talk about that a little bit. What we call phishing is a cyber crime in which a target is contacted by email by someone posing as, you know, a legitimate institution, Amazon or Walmart or something like that, to lure individuals into providing sensitive data, you know, some sort of personally identifiable information, banking information, credit card details, passwords. The information is then used to access important accounts. And this can result in identity theft. It can result in financial loss and all sorts of problems, right? Also, you might hear terms associated with phishing, such as vishing with a V, which is essentially phishing but through voice phone calls, or smishing with an SM, like SMS or texting. So that's phishing through texting. But, you know, out of all the numbers on this slide, just remember this one, the only one that's on the test. 91% of cyber attacks started with a phishing email. And we're seeing phishing emails coming into school districts now, right? Staff and faculty members are receiving phishing emails. So here we see a classic example of a phishing email. Now, if you worked at this particular school, this email might appear fairly normal. However, there's a couple indicators that something's wrong. So I'm going to just point out a few of them here, right? First of all, in the signature block, we see warm regards, memphis.edu, sorry, IT help desk, which seems a little odd that they would put memphis.edu. And if you worked in the school district, you might recognize that that is not the normal way they put their signature block. So that might kind of stand out as a little bit odd or different to you, right? Secondly, you'll notice that there's a 24-hour rush on this, right? Kindly verify your email within 24 hours, or your email account is going to be temporarily suspended. Phishing emails almost always contain a sense of urgency. Whenever you get an email where there is a sense of urgency pushing you to hurry up and make a decision, really what it's doing is pushing you to hurry up and make a bad decision, right? That is often a giveaway for a phishing email. But the big giveaway here, drum roll please.
I don't know if you can hear it, Keith, but I'm trying to do the drum roll for you.
Oh, Kate, I couldn't hear it. Oh, I
Sorry
was
about
really
that.
looking forward to
Sorry.
a really good drum roll here. I
I
think it's
know,
the
I know.
sound cancellation
I
on your
know,
headsets
I
or
know.
something. Sorry, we had this planned out. We were going to have a great drum roll here, but sorry,
Didn't work
crash
out.
and burn, crash and burn. We'll have to practice that for next time. But the big giveaway here on this phishing email is over here on the right-hand side of it where it says click here. That's a hyperlink. And if you were to hover your mouse there, it would show you where that hyperlink actually goes. And you can see we have it illustrated there that it goes to something like WERFG, blah, 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 right? So whenever you get an email like that, you can hover your mouse. Don't click, just hover, and it will show you where that link goes. And in this particular case, that is extremely suspicious. In fact, that's a giveaway because we know that that is not a website or a link for something internal to that school district, right? So we know that that is a phishing email. And when this comes up, when something like this occurs, you would want to immediately contact your tech department and report this to them and let them know what you received, right? And they would, you would report this to them and then they would take care of it from there, right? A couple of other things to be wary of when it comes to suspicious emails: attachments. Never, ever, 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 ever click on an attachment. Never, if I didn't say it
Never?
enough,
Never?
never click on an attachment from someone whose email you don't recognize, right? And it may seem like it's somebody within your organization, but if you don't know them, if you don't recognize their email address, don't click on that attachment, right? If you're unsure or if you're just suspicious, right? You're just a little unsure, still contact your IT department and check it out, right? Let them check it out for you. They can check it out and let you know if it's legitimate or not. And also something to always keep in mind, if you get something in your email that is some sort of an offer that's too good to be true, then you know what I'm going to say, right? It's not true, right? If it's too good to be true, it's definitely not true. So that's phishing.
So the last piece we're going to talk about is passwords. So passwords provide basically the first line of defense against unauthorized access to your computer and personal information. So the stronger your password, the more protected your computer will be from hackers or malicious software. And having a strong password is an essential piece to protecting data, student data too. So we have some valuable password don'ts and password do's. We're going to start with the don'ts. So the first we have is don't use personal information. This is easier said than done, right? So some examples we give you are don't use your dog's name or your street name. I would not have a password that is my first name and birth date. Maybe years ago I did, but not now, right? We know better. Don't use common words. So the most common password words that we found were the word password, QWERTY. Am I saying that right, Keith? QWERTY?
Yes.
QWERTY
Kate
keyboard?
didn't believe me on this one.
QWERTY keyboard. And the word picture. The word picture. So those were the most common password words. So don't use common words. Don't use the same password at multiple websites. I'm guilty of this way long ago. So it's the same with your passwords on downtime when you're not at work. You wouldn't use the same password for Facebook or Instagram that you would for TikTok or your banking sign-on. Because if a hacker can figure out your password on one website, chances are they can figure it out on the other. So you may have a problem if you're using the same password on multiple websites. So don't do it at school or on your downtime. Don't use Post-it notes. This is a big one. How many of us get the notification that our password has expired and we have to create a new one within 7 days, right? We always get that and we're like, well, now what am I going to use my password as? So you make one up on the fly, and to remember it for logging in tomorrow, you write it on a Post-it note and you stick it on your computer, right? All of us have done that. Habits are hard to break. I know this, but this is an important one to break because you don't want to leave your password on a Post-it note for everyone to see if they come into your room. And don't share your password. So this is a big one, especially for schools. I was a teacher once as well. It's easy to share your password maybe with substitute teachers when you're going to be out for a couple of days, but it's the best choice when it comes to protecting student data to not share it. So always keep in mind these don'ts are not to come down on you. If you do any of these, they're just there to make you more aware of what you can do or what you can't do to protect student data, or what you shouldn't do to protect student data. So we went over the password don'ts, so now we'll go over the password do's. So these are just, again, just some tips, things I'm still learning to do as well. So the first do that we have is do use symbols, numbers, and cases. And we've provided this example for you here on the screen. One thing I always want to, kind of like the overarching theme when it comes to password do's, is make it something that you're going to remember, right? You want it to be hard for hackers, but you want it to be easy for you to remember. You don't want to have to struggle remembering it. The next is do use non-dictionary words, or nonsense words, as some people would call it. So you'll see here, the example is piano. That's actually the word piano, but just written with symbols, numbers, and cases. And then lastly is do use passphrases. Again, I can't say it enough. Use a passphrase that you're going to remember. And if you're going to be using symbols, numbers, and cases, put them in there so that you can remember. So we have this example of I wake up at 5 a.m. Again, it could be something as small as I love pizza, right? But make it fun. Use symbols, numbers, cases, anything. But again, the big theme is make it something for it to be hard for hackers to hack into, but for easy for you to remember.
All right, great. So that, just to kind of wrap it up, we want to make sure that everybody knows that your district data protection officer, or DPO, is the point person for everything data privacy related for your district. And for Peru, we know it's Nick Damiani. And for Malone, it's your superintendent, Jerry Griffin. And if I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody. I think I saw something flash up in the chat there too, about that. So we'll check that afterwards. Here at NARIC, Kate and I were part of what's called the Data Security and Privacy Team, and we have a couple other members on our team as well. And what we're here for is to provide support to your district and to your district DPOs specifically throughout our whole region, really, to help and support you in everything that that they need to do, that they need to accomplish to satisfy the requirements of Ed Law 2D and to make their district more secure, cybersecurity wise, and protecting PII and student and teacher data. So one of the services that we provide, Kate and I specifically, we deal with one-on-one coaching for district DPOs, so that throughout the year we help your DPO to ensure that the district satisfies all those Ed Law 2D requirements and really excels in all of the data privacy standards, such as the NIST cybersecurity framework, for example. So I want to thank everybody for coming and attending.